room. Just letting you know, I felt a little under the weather for the past couple of days. So I have been trying to focus on getting this quilt behind me underway, trying to get that done rather than concentrate on things that take a lot of brain power because I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. I'm feeling a little bit dizzy, a little feverish. So I wanted to continue on this project because it's kind of a no-brainer. I don't have to really think in order to work on this quilt, especially at the stage that I'm at. So what is this quilt behind me? This is my Almost in Baltimore quilt, and it's a quilt that I've been working on with members of Ahead of the Curve for the past couple of years. And we actually started the Almost in Baltimore quilt project 2 years ago, and I taught it over an 18-month period. And then that project or that course now lives inside of the membership. So this is something that any of our Gold and Platinum members, they can go back and they can work on these blocks. We have videos of all the blocks. But where we did not, where I didn't finish my project is when I got to the borders. So let's talk about those borders. All right, I'm gonna just check in the chat and see who's here. All right, great. Oops, sorry, let me close that chat now. All right, so I stalled at the borders because these blocks were the simple versions of the Baltimore blocks. Each of the Baltimore blocks had a plain version and a fancy version. So on the plain versions, there was less applique, less cutting, less stitching, less to do. On the fancy versions, there was more applique, more layers, more applique shapes, more stitching, and the process was just a little bit longer for those people that did the fancy versions. So because this quilt example represents the plain version, I wanted to do a border that was relatively plain. So I decided on this double scallop border. Well, you might not think it's very plain, but I want to tell you that it's really, really simple to make. So today I want to walk you through how I made this very, very simple border. And I'm even going to show you right here on my table, I'm going to show you how I cut out those swags using my Rings and Things tools. Now, the challenge with making swags is they are easy to rotary cut because they're nice, graceful curves, but there's not a lot of sizes that you can make of these swags because the tools that we have, the Rings and Things tools, the biggest arc that I have is this 9-inch curve. So I'm going to show you how I use the 7-inch curve and the 9-inch curve to make those swags. And the 7-inch swag, that's the widest I can make them with this technique. Now I am going to be playing with other techniques in the future. But for right now, this is the only quilt that I've made with the swags on the border, and this is the only one that I have perfected. So I want to show you how to make this one right here. Okay, so we're starting off with our border fabric, and that border fabric that I'm using is this gorgeous fabric that was the basis for my Almost in Baltimore quilt. So I made this Almost in Baltimore quilt after finding this fabric with those pretty little butterflies on it, and I based all of my colors from this main fabric. And I did use that main fabric in a few of the blocks. You can see it right there on my acorn block, my oak leaf block. So that's called Oak and Reel, and I use this fabric in the center of that block. But all of the other blocks, not all of the other blocks have this fabric, but it's all inspired by this fabric right here. So I'm going to use this fabric in order to cut some of my swags. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put Misty Fuse on the back of that fabric. So when you are cutting a 7-inch swag, we're going to cut our fabric 7 inches wide. but I've got a lot of this fabric because I need to make a lot of those swags. So the best way to go about putting your Misty Fuse on is to take it out of the package. You've got 2.5 yards here. So we're gonna take it out of the package and we're just gonna cut a 7-inch wide piece of the Misty Fuse. So go right down on your board here, use your regular ruler and cut that width to 7 inches. So 7 inches. Then we're gonna put that fusible on the back of our fabric using an applique pressing sheet. Let me just reach up and grab my applique pressing sheet so that you can see what that's all about. So this is the Fat Goddess sheet by Misty Fuse. If you haven't used this yet, you'll want to tune into my applique school, because during applique school, I teach you how to fuse your fabric and then how to get started with this rotary cut applique process. So after putting the fusible on the fabric, one way to make this a little faster is to cut 2 swags at a time. So I'm going to put the fabrics right sides together or wrong sides together. It doesn't matter. And I'm going to fold that big long piece of fabric into a shorter piece of fabric that is 2 layers. And that way I can cut out my applique shapes 2 at a time. And I'm just going to angle my camera down a little bit here. Let me get that right. Okay. Then I'm going to cut out those applique shapes with a 28mm rotary cutter. I need a nice sharp rotary cutter, so I should be putting a new blade in my rotary cutter. And I'm looking for my rotary cutter here. Here it is. So I'll see how sharp this blade is when I get started cutting. And if it's not sharp enough, I've got my bonus little my extra little blades right here, just in case this is not sharp enough. Now, I'll tell you, I normally do not sit to cut. I'm normally standing up when I cut. Feeling a little woozy today, so I decided to do a project today that I could sit and cut for all of you so that I didn't have to stand up and get dizzy. So let's get started. I've got the Misty Fuse already on the back of my fabric. I've got my fabric 2 layers together. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a curve. I can either use the 7-inch or the 9-inch first. It's totally up to you. But I'm going to start cutting with the 7-inch curve. And I know that my swag is going to be made from the 7-inch curve on the bottom of the swag, and the 9-inch curve is the top of that swag. So I'm going to get started using the centering line on the tool. That's the 90-degree line. That gives you a nice half circle shape, and that's a great way to start. And yeah, I'm going to have to stand up to cut this. I just have a hard time sitting and cutting. But I'll come back to that sitting position so that we can talk our way through this. So I've made that first cut, right? Just leave your fabric right here. Don't move this fabric away because we're just going to keep cutting over and over and over again. Now, what I want to do is I want to scoop out that 7-inch curve with my 9-inch curve, but I want to keep it the full width of the fabric. So I'm not going to slide this down, because if I slide it down, I'm making this curve shorter. So I want to go from point to point here at the top of the fabric where I know it was 7 inches wide. And I'm just going to scoop out that curve with the 9-inch curve. So bear with me as I try to cut sitting down. If I'm cutting sitting down, I definitely need a super sharp blade because I can't get the leverage on the tool. So you need to make sure, no matter how you're cutting, that you have a really sharp blade. But especially cutting sitting down, it's a little bit harder. So now I've got my first 2 swags. Remember, I've got 2 layers right there. How easy was that, right? No tracing, no cutting with scissors, no peeling paper backings off your fusible. So this is such a simple way to do your applique, and this technique is called rotary cut applique. But what I want to show you is that when making these swags, We don't have to trace each individual little swag. We're simply going to alternate between the two tools. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to that 7-inch tool. And the nice thing is, to save fabric, I don't have to use the centering line on the tool and cut a full half circle right here. I can simply slide that tool right up here, and let's look at the depth of that curve. Look how deep it is. So I just need to go as deep as that curve is, maybe just a little bit deeper here, so that I can retrim with the 9-inch curve. So we should look at the measurement and put a piece of glow line tape right on your tool that indicates how deep that curve is. That's what's going to make it easier to make your next set of curves and to not, or to hardly waste any fabric whatsoever. So do I use the top of the glow line tape or the bottom of the glow line tape? I'm going to opt for the top of the glow line tape, so it gives me a little bit more leeway and we won't make any mistakes that way. But if you use the bottom of the glow line tape and you measure it accurately, you can have almost zero waste. So I'm going to go ahead and use the top of the glow line tape to start. Then I'm going to switch to the bottom of the glow line tape and show you how accurate we can get without any waste at all. And I see a few of you out there. Nice to see you. We've got Kathy from Ohio. Kathy, we were on a call yesterday, and I said I was going to add this technique to our technique videos. So in our Ahead of the Curve membership, we have technique videos that show you different techniques with the tools. So if I want to cut a clamshell, you go to the clamshell technique video. If I want to cut a swag, we're going to go to the swag technique video. So I had to stand up again. It's so hard for me to cut without standing. But there you go. We've got our first little cut. Just move that fabric away and then make sure we're clean around that edge. Then we're going to take away that tool and we're going to recut with the 9-inch tool. So because I used the top of the glow line tape, I'm actually going to go down here by about 1/4 of an inch. And there's 1/4 of an inch marking on the tool, and that's the same width as the glow line tape. So what I'm seeing is that I'm going from edge to edge of my fabric. So that scallop ends up exactly 7 inches wide. It's 7 inches wide because the fabric that I'm cutting is 7 inches wide. So let's see how we did. We've got another couple of swags here. We've got a tiny little bit of waste, but see, it has that 1/4 inch thickness in the middle. So if I actually use the bottom of the glow line tape, I'm going to eliminate even that much waste. But I'm going to get that same beautiful smiley face, that beautiful swag over and over and over again. So let's do it again. And this time we're going to use the bottom of the glow line tape. Now I do like to put the edges of my fabric on the solid lines of my board. So you'll see that this is just fitting between the 7-inch markings. And if it's not, you're going to want to trim your fabric down exactly to 7 inches. Mine's actually a little bit wider than 7 inches, but you can trim that fabric exactly to 7 inches, and it's going to make this process even faster and easier because you're going to have reference points. You're going to know exactly where you need to place that 9-inch tool. I'm a little bit wider up here, so I'm going to ignore this little bit of fabric, and wherever that 7-inch curve came into play, right there, then I'm going to use my 9-inch curve to scoop out that 7, right, to just re-round this 7-inch curve up here and make it a little less curvy, a little wider on the top of that scallop. So there we go. Now we have this much waste, when we're cutting our little scallops. Isn't that fabulous? And now we've got 6 scallops cut, and I cut all of the swags or the scallops for that quilt in about half an hour. Imagine how much time that would take when you are cutting everything for that quilt. How many swags are there? Oh my gosh, there's 22 on each of the borders roughly. So that's over 100 swags on that border. So getting them cut this way quickly and easily totally makes sense. Now I'm not going to continue cutting because I've already got all of my swags cut for this quilt. But I will give you some pointers on the sewing. So let's go ahead and start sewing those swags here on my border. So the first thing is that where the swags intersect, it's always wonderful to put some type of decorative motif where those swags intersect. And that could be a little bud. It could be a little butterfly. I chose to just do a 1-inch round circle. And you can cut those 1-inch round circles with your Hearts and More tool, template A, on the small end, the 1-inch side. So I cut out a whole bunch of 1-inch circles, and that's what I used to join my swag ends together. And because this is the plain version of the quilt, I think that simple little swag with the 1-inch circle, that's all you need. Now I had played with putting some teardrops in here. I had played with putting leaf shapes coming down. I had played with putting a bow right here. But I wanted my plain version. I wanted the blocks to sing and not so much having your focus on the border. So while I'm here at my sewing machine, I'm going to show you a few little gadgets that I always keep handy. First is my reading glasses. If you are blanket stitching, you're going to need a good pair of either reading glasses, or what I use is my magnifying glass. So this is the 7X magnifier from Daylight. They've just come out with a new one, but I really love mine that I've had for years. Let's see if I can adjust this camera a little bit so you can see a little bit more. Then I'm sewing with a variegated thread, and I'm using the Wonderful thread called Tootie. I just love the gentle variegation in the Tootie thread. This one's called Strawberry, and it's just perfect for all these different reds and pinks on my swag. So I've got Tootie in my top thread, and I've got a Wonderful Deco Bob in the bobbin. Deco Bob is a 80 weight thread that balances out your cotton thread on the top of your machine, and it sews beautifully with the Tootie on top and the Deco Bob in the bobbin. I also use up all my old bobbins when I'm doing blanket stitching, because if your tension is adjusted correctly, you don't necessarily need the exact same color in your bobbin as on your top thread. And I never use decorative variegated thread in the bobbin, so I'll go through my bobbin case and use up all of the reds and pinks and things that look like red, maybe fuchsia, in my bobbin so that I can clear out my old cotton bobbins, especially those 50 weight colors. I'll use those all up when I'm blanket stitching. But I know yesterday I ran out of used bobbins and those multicolor bobbins, and I went ahead and started using a Deco Bob bobbin that I already had pre-wound. So I'm actually using this purplish color, and it's working beautifully with the red on top. All right, so I'm just about done with my blanket stitching around this example, and it's the last of the 4 borders. I'm on the last border out of all 4, and I've already blanket stitched around the top of this swag and around my circles, and this is the order in which I did my blanket stitching. I did blanket stitching down and then all around, and then back up to here, blanket stitching across, and then all around the circle and over to here. And then when I finished all of that row, I came back and I did the bottoms of those swags. Okay, once I got all the way to the end and I did all the bottoms of the swags, then I went ahead and started this line of swags. I did this one and all the way around. I did the next one and all the way around. So I'm getting the circles done when I do the tops of my swags. Circles are done, top of my swag, and now I'm coming back the opposite way. So you're gonna see me finishing up this swag as I complete the blanket stitching on the bottom. Now, those of you that have been following me, you know that I use a blanket stitch for 90% of my applique. However, there's many other stitches you can use. This is just my favorite stitch. When I'm stitching, I keep a few other tools next to me. In addition to those wonderful reading glasses, you're going to want to have your tweezers, and these are reverse action tweezers. And you're going to want to have your nice little nice sharp snips, and these are the snips from Famore. These are in my basic applique toolkit, and I just love these and these. They both come in my basic applique toolkit, and they are always in a little mug right here that sits next to my sewing machine as I'm stitching. I hang my glasses right over the side, so everything that I need is in that little mug. Now I'm also going to put on some quilting gloves, and I love these gloves for free motion quilting on my domestic machine, but I also love using them for blanket stitching. Now you might think that I am sitting awfully low at my machine. My pneumatic chair is all the way down. Why do I do that? Well, first of all, I am short, but I purposefully put my chair all the way down because I want my elbows to be at a really comfortable position. So I could go up by a couple of inches. Honestly, the pneumatic chair broke the other day, and so I can't go up just a little bit higher. But I love it because I can really see that needle. I don't have to bend over or lean over to see exactly where that needle is going. So I like my chair down low. Just make sure you do want to have your elbows at a nice right angle. So I am a little bit too low for long-term sewing, but I've only got a little bit more to do, so I'm just going to go with it, and then I'll ask for a new pneumatic chair for Christmas. They can be replaced, by the way. You can replace that little pneumatic tube in the middle, and so it can be fixed. I just haven't gotten around to doing that yet. So I've got my blanket stitching set on 2 and 2, 2 millimeters in length and 2 millimeters in width, and I'm going to put my needle down to see where that needle is positioned. When you are stitching around your applique, you don't want to pierce the applique with the needle. You want your needle to go on the outside edge of the applique, and only when it crosses over on that cross stitch, it goes into the applique. So you'll see that I can actually stitch at quite a quick pace because, and I'll get my fingers out of the way and see if I can get you up there a little bit closer. Okay, I go at kind of a quick pace because I'm going around these graceful curves. And I've gotten so good at this that I can just turn here on the fly. Now, if you're not very good at blanket stitching, you're going to want to stop when your needle is in the outside position. And I'm just going to clean off the lint from hours of sewing yesterday. This thread is not very linty, but you do get a little bit of lint, and so I'm just going to clean that off before we get you really close up with that needle. Okay, so when your needle goes down, it's on the outside of the applique, and when it takes that bite across, then you're going into the applique. When you're new at applique, you're going to go very slowly, and you're going to want to pivot only when the needle is in the outside position. So when your needle is on the outside edge, you can pivot to follow that applique shape. But once you get good at it, you can kind of pivot on the fly here. What you don't want to happen is if you see little V-shaped stitches where your needle is on the inside of the applique and then you pivot, you're not going to get those two threads stacking one on top of the other on an in and out stitch, and you need that. You need them to be stacked one on top of the other for beautiful applique. So don't go so fast that you are pivoting when your needle is in the wrong position. So I'm going to go right up to that little circle. And then I need to travel along the edge of the circle. So I'm just going to stitch to a straight stitch. And I'm going to make a few little stitches on the outside of that circle. And then I'm going to go back to my blanket stitch again. So when I go to my blanket stitch, my needle position changes. So I have to make sure that I carefully put that needle on the outside edge of the applique before I pivot and I start my applique going in the opposite direction. Now here's another little tip for you. Do you see all of this area that I've already appliqued? I've got one pin here, and I'm just going to roll up this section so that it stays all together and it doesn't flop down behind my sewing machine where it's going to be very awkward to pivot. So if I have both of these ends and I roll up both ends, I had unrolled this one because I wanted to show you my stitching path. But if I roll up this end right here, just like this, then I have two bigger pieces that I can twist and turn around, and I unroll it as needed. So I'm going to continue to roll this end up and unroll this end to get to the next section that I need to applique. So it's kind of like machine quilting. You just need to control what's under your needle. So make sure that everything that is on the outside edges is easy to control, that you are loose in front of that needle, that nothing is causing drag on that needle, so that you can easily get around your curves without a whole lot of fabric dragging and weighing you down. Okay, we're just about done with this one. And that's as easy as it is to go around this beautifully fused fabric with your blanket stitching. Now, what happens if your fabric is not beautifully fused? So you have fused these swags onto your fabric, but what happens if the edges come loose? Well, that can absolutely happen if you've got a lot of wear and tear on your applique. So that's one of the reasons why I keep it rolled up, so there's less wear and tear on the edges of the applique as this piece is moving through your machine. Now you might find that you have little edges of your applique, the edge pieces of your applique, if they become frayed at all, I usually don't worry about that. My cotton thread will grab these little cotton fibers and will often move them in line with the applique edge, so I stitch right over them and they're not noticeable that they have frayed. If you are concerned about that fraying, whoops, you may want to, let me just stabilize my camera there. You may want to take a little bit of Roxanne glue baste it. I've got just a little bit here. I'll put it on the back of my hand. And then I can use a kitchen skewer, or in this case, I've got my porcupine quill here. And I'm going to grab a tiny tad of that little, that washable glue, and I can take these edges and put them right in line with what I am about to stitch, right in line with the edge of the applique. So you can take that tiny little bit of glue and just smooth those edges back into place. Now, if you put too much glue on there, like I just did, this is a washable glue, and it's going to come right back out when you wash your quilt. But you can always just scrape it off here too with the edge of that porcupine quill or your kitchen skewer, and you're not even going to notice it's there. Now, you don't need to wait for that glue to set. You can go ahead and stitch right over the wet glue. Let me travel over there with my straight stitch. Then I'm going to go back to my blanket stitching and reposition my needle. I want to make sure that my needle goes right on the outside of that applique piece. And now I'm just going to stitch right over that section that I glued. The glue is washable, but you won't even know it's there. So you don't necessarily have to go back and wash that out. It's just doing the job of temporarily holding those edges in place as you are stitching. Now, there are times where there's a little bit of fraying happening right here, and sometimes you can just pull that thread off because it's on the edge of a curve and it doesn't even show after I've pulled that thread away. So I can do that. But if we do have a frayed edge that's really connected, it's not going to pull away. That's not going to come back in when you stitch over it. It's frayed too much, and that's going to stick out after I have stitched. Well, either before or after my stitching, I'm going to go in with my tweezers, and I'm going to grab that little thread, and I'm just going to cut up under it with my curved snips. Maybe there's another one right here. Go ahead and cut that one. And now when you stitch over, that fraying will never happen again because your blanket stitching is encasing that edge and having it nice and tight together. Having the blanket stitching nice and tight together prevents those edges from ever fraying again. So I'm going to, let me just get up to the next. I want to end my thread because I want to show you something different, but I don't want to ruin my piece. So let's get up to a logical stopping place here at the circle. Okay, my last stitch goes down, and then I'm going to bring my thread up. I'm going to pull it out nice and long, and I'm going to bring my threads to the back and bury my threads. But a friend of mine came by the other day and showed me a baby quilt that she made for her grandchild. And it was really beautiful. And Alicia, I'm so proud of you for doing your first ever applique quilt. So she brought that quilt. Her husband was with her. And so beautiful. She put the letters of the alphabet on the quilt and dinosaurs, and it was just absolutely delightful. But she said, I want you to critique it. I want to learn from this experience and learn what I've done, what I could do better. So I made some suggestions of what she could do better. And I'm going to stitch this out on a piece of scrap fabric here. This is some beautiful gradation fabric that I just received in. It is from Jennifer Sampu, and it is a gorgeous gradation that I purchased. I purchased an entire bolt so that I could make gradations kits. So I love this fabric, but I was trying to choose a thread color that went well with the fabric. So that's why I have the sample right here with all of this different blanket stitching on it. But what I want to do is I want to show you some different decorative stitches that you could use on your machine. So the stitch that I use goes one step forward and one step across. So it stitches forward and then across and back, forward, across and back, forward, across and back. That is generally the stitch that I use. But when I look at that mode of my applique stitches, there are multiple applique stitches that you can use. And this is the one my friend used for her baby quilt. So this stitch goes forward, 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 3 stitches forward, across and back, 3 stitches forward, across and back, 3 stitches forward, across and back. I do not like that stitch. So when she asked me what she could do better, I suggested that her next quilt, she look on her machine and see if there's a stitch that only goes forward 1 time. And I'm going to show you, after I stitch this out for a second, I'm going to show you why that is critical. Remember I said your threads on the edge will not fray. It's because you have that 1 stitch forward before it goes across and back. When you have 3 stitches forward, there's too much distance there between your cross stitches, and that edge is going to have room to fray between that stitch. So 3 stitches forward before it goes across and back, that's too wide. And you can't tighten that up. You could, you could shorten the stitch in between, but then it's almost like 3 stitches one after the other. It just doesn't look nice. So the top stitch there is the one that you're going for. It's really tight together so that your applique does not have room to fray. So what other stitches would work well for applique? If we don't have the stitch that goes 1 stitch forward and 1 stitch across. So let's look at our other stitches. I'm going to go back to that mode, and in my applique stitches, I have what we call a triple stitch. And I love this stitch myself. And let's see if I can find the right one. The triple stitch is, I'm going to say it's 49. Let me see. Let me try one more time. 42. All right, I'm going to go with 43 and see what happens with that one. Can't quite tell from the picture what it's going to do, so let's figure it out together. So when I do stitch number 43, let's see what happens. Yeah, that's the one I wanted. Oh, this is a different one. So this is duplicating every single stitch. So what this one is doing is it's going forward, back, forward, across, 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 across. This one is going 3 stitches along the edge and then 2 stitches in. That's going to build up very heavy and be very, very noticeable. You might like that. You might like that stitch because it's really going to be very dominant. So let's do it slowly. Forward, back, forward, across, across. Okay, this one's putting 2 stitches in between the across. And I don't love that. It still has 2 stitches in between, and I like the one that just has 1. But let's stitch it out a little bit. Let's see what you think. Okay, and I'm going to cut that so I can bring it up to you. Now, we are talking heavy stitching. This is really predominant, and I don't love it, right? It's got 2 stitches in between the cross stitch, so there's a little bit more distance in between them, and then that cross stitch is doubled. That's gone across twice. So it goes across and back, across and back. So there's 4 stitches there. So A, it's really slow. B, it's going to use a lot of thread. And C, it's just super duper heavy, which would be a good approximation of a hand stitching technique, but it's not what I like for my applique. So let me try one more time to find the stitch that I like best. And I'm going to go up here and see what it is. So 41 and 42. Okay, 45 is the one that I use all the time. I'm going to go ahead and try out number 41 on my machine. Of course, every machine is different, so these numbers mean nothing to you. Vicky, hey, there you go. Brenda, nice to see you. Nat, wonderful way to see you. What an easy way to cut stitch. to cut such beautiful swags. What an easy way to cut such beautiful swags. Thank you, Kat. I love doing the swags. Hey, Donna, how are you, Janie? Wonderful to see you. I do. I sew on an Elna. Yeah. Okay. So there are so many machines that will do these stitches for you. You don't have to sew on an Elna like I do, but I do love my Elna. I'm using the Elna Excellence 740. I have a 780 or a 760 sitting over there. I have two different models of Elnas, and I have many more sewing machines in my back room. And as long as they do a beautiful blanket stitch, I'm happy. So my neighbor or my friend that came over with her applique for me to evaluate, she's sewing on a baby lock machine, and she has a lot of different applique stitches as well. So any machine will do an applique stitch. Which applique stitch? I'm not sure. We'll have to test them out. So this is what I'm suggesting that you do. Put on a beautiful thread, especially a variegated thread, and let's test out your stitches to find out which is the most beautiful one for your applique. So I'm going to cut that one, and let's take a look. So from our stitching that had 2 stitches in between, I've modified it now, and now I've got just 1 stitch in between, and I'm a lot happier with that look. Now, I did mess with the dimensions. So normally I go 2 and 2 on my dimensions, and this is 2 and 2.5, and I'm not as happy with that. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to do that stitch again right above it. And I'm going to go down to 2 and 2, and let's see what that looks like. So what I like about this stitch, no, this is not the right one. Let's try 41. Okay. What I like about this stitch is it's not going across into the applique twice. It goes forward, back, forward, across, across. Forward, back, forward, across, across, forward, back, forward, across, across, and I'm reducing my stitch length and my stitch width to 2 and 2. So now let me stitch that out. And I can go pretty quickly once I get going, just to give you a little bit of an example. And there it is. Okay. There is my absolute favorite stitch for applique, is called what I call the triple stitch, because it goes forward, back, forward along the edge of the applique, and then it just goes across one time, across and back one time. And that is a beautiful, gorgeous applique stitch. The others are as well. If your machine only does one of these other stitches, all is not lost. You're going to be able to do beautiful applique. But the stitch that I like best is either the single stitch, forward, across and back, forward, across and back, or what I call the triple stitch. Forward, back, forward, across, across, forward, back, forward, across and back. So this one gives you a lot heavier look. It camouflages the edges of your applique better, and it prevents those edges from fraying. So let's take a peek. What else could we use for our applique stitching? Well, there are endless possibilities. Every machine has their own beautiful decorative machine stitches. So I'm only going to show you one more. And I'm going to show you stitch number, doesn't matter to you because all machines are different, but I'm going to go with stitch number 106. Let me try that one. So this is what we call a feather stitch. And I like a feather stitch because the feather stitch is great for beginners. I'm going to do 106. Okay. And I'm going to stitch it out as is right now. And then we're going to adjust the length and the width to see what you like best. So let's go ahead and stitch that feather stitch. And I use this feather stitch when I'm making my baseball quilt. I like to call this a baseball stitch because it looks like the stitching on a baseball. I love this stitch because where it does have a centering line, it then goes off in both directions. It goes off to the left and it goes off to the right. And when you go off to the left and to the right, you have a little bit more of a forgiving path. If you do not hit the exact edge of your applique, it's still going to be beautiful. Let me cut my thread, and there you go. So there is what I call the baseball stitch. It's really called a feather stitch. And look at the pretty variegation to that thread. It doesn't have a wide range. It goes from basically from pink to a dark, dark red, but everything in between. So no matter what red fabric you are sewing on, that thread is going to look gorgeous. Now, I didn't even adjust my length or my width. I thought that what it was set at was just beautiful. But let's go ahead and do a little bit more, and let's take time to adjust the length and the width, and I want to see what you think. So let's make it a little narrower. So I'm going to go from a 5 down to a 3.5, and let's make it a little less space between the stitches. So I went from a 3.5 to a 2. And I just want to experiment. And I actually really love the stitch as it comes with the machine. I don't normally make a lot of adjustments to that, but I want to show you the difference between the standard machine stitch and the way I've adjusted it, just so that you know that you can tailor make it to your needs. It doesn't have to be just what comes out of the machine. So looking at this stitch, I'm going to go a little bit wider. Let's do a 4. When I do these little samples, I try to keep a pen or a pencil near me. And then I'll go in, and when I make the changes on the size of the stitch, let's go ahead and make a line right here. And this right here is a 4, and this from that point forward is going to be a 5. So let's finish out stitching our 4, and that's our stitch width. Okay, and right at that line, I'm going to switch to 5. Because I really want to see the differences between the stitch, and you can keep a whole sampler of all of your stitches stitched out with a pretty variegated thread like this, and then it's really nice to compare. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make another line just for the heck of it. That's a 5, and I'm going to change it to a 6. So once we get to that pencil line, I'm going to switch to a 6, and we're going to see how wide that can go and what it looks like. Now, this is a 6, but I left my stitch length at 2. So what if I go from my 6 and 2, and I'm going to write 6 and 2, and then I'm going to go to 6 and 3. So I'll go to the next line, and then I'm going to switch to 6 and 3. Oh, 2.5 is the widest it will go. So the longest the stitch length will go. So I'm going to have to change that marking from 6 and 3 to 6 and 2.5. So I recommend that you spend a day or an hour just testing out all of the different stitches on your machine and start playing with the dimensions. So that 6 and 2.5, that looks great. It's a little wide for me. So I'm going to go down to the 5 and 2.5. Oh, so no, that's 6 and 2.5, 6 and 2, 5 and 2, and then the 4 and 2. right? So we have all of these different options, and this is what the stitch looked like straight from the machine. So when you reset, when you go to choose that stitch again, it's going to reset to your original settings. And then if you like that setting, then you never have to change it. So these are all different stitches that you could use on your applique. But look at my machine. It has hundreds of stitches. So I would go right down the line, especially in this heirloom stitching section, and I would try out all of these different heirloom stitches, all of these different quilting stitches. Then we've got some more decorative stitches right here. And in this section right here, it's called my applique stitches. Now these are truly buttonhole stitches in the shape of a buttonhole. So I don't use buttonhole stitches. So I call these over here my applique blanket stitches. So that's a little bit about how my machine handles all of those different stitches and just a sampling of what you could try on your applique. Now I do want to go right up to my quilt here and show you that stitching on the quilt. I love a good blanket stitch, and on my quilts, that's generally the only stitch that I use. Why? Because I'm good at it. It's easier for me to do. I know exactly where my needle is going to go down. I get used to moving around those points and the tips of the flowers, so I can get really, really accurate placement of my needle on those applique stitches. So I like to use the same stitch all the time because I've gotten really proficient at that one stitch. But there are times when you just want to get creative and use different stitches on your applique to give you different edge effects. If you used a what was it called? If you use that feather stitch around these leaves, you're going to get leaves that look like they have serrated edges. And there are leaves out there with those serrated edges in real life. So you can borrow those ideas from nature, find a stitch that emulates that edge, and then you can stitch out your applique to look more realistic and to look more like what Mother Nature produces out there. Also, you can just utilize your machine to its best ability and try out all of those different stitches. Well, I better get back to sewing those swags for my borders. Together, we came so close, and I only have a few little bottoms of these swags to go. Let's see what I've got left. I've got 1, 2, 3. Only 3 more swags to go. I should have just kept going. Then we would have been done with border number 4. So the next time we're sewing in slippers together, I might be putting the borders on this quilt and figuring out what to do in the corners. Now, if you saw my newsletter recently, I showed you what I'm planning for the corners of this quilt, but I won't know until I get these swags centered on the quilt to know exactly how they're going to come together in the borders. So my goal is to get all 4 borders sewn on before next Tuesday. And then next Tuesday, we can actually design and cut and fuse our border swags. I'll get the stitching done, and then this quilt is off to the professional machine quilter. So if you've ever gotten frustrated with a UFO pile that just seems to be growing and not getting completed, think about finishing up some of your quilts with just a touch of applique. Wouldn't some of your basic pieced quilts look gorgeous with the applique border? Maybe just a few vines and leaves, maybe just in 1 or 2 corners. We can get our pieced quilts done faster. We can get our applique quilts done faster, and we can do them with beautiful fused and rotary cut applique. Now, if you want more lessons like this, we have our Ahead of the Curve membership, where I teach applique every step of the way. Every block was done in a separate class to show you how to rotary cut your applique shapes and how to get down to the brass tacks of stitching as well. So I would love for you to join us in our Ahead of the Curve membership. Or if you're just curious about different ways that you can learn applique, we have our free applique school coming up on November 17th, 18th, and 19th. So if you're brand new to Sue Pelland Designs, applique school is the best way to compare those different applique methods, find the one that's going to work best for you, and dive right in to learn a little bit more about my method of applique called rotary cut applique. Then, once you've had the chance to come to applique school, come and work with me. We have so much fun together. We have such a wonderful club in our Ahead of the Curve membership, and that's where you're really going to learn the ins and outs of using these tools, using your sewing machine to create beautiful applique quilts in a fraction of the time of traditional methods. So sign up for Applique School right now on my website. Just go to the website, find the Applique School button, touch on that button, and you'll be registered for our 3 days of Applique School. Let me just check on you and see if you had any questions. No, it looks like comments, but no questions. What kind of sewing machine are you using? I think I covered that. Thank you, Kat. I do sew on an Elna, and it's the Elna 740. That one I think is out. It's an older model. So the newer model might be the 780, 760, but I do sew on an Elna. You're going to have these beautiful applique stitches on any sewing machine, and I wish you the best exploring applique. If you want to dive in further, come to Applique School or join our Ahead of the Curve membership. I'll see you all soon. Have a wonderful day. Mwah. Talk to you later.